What's up, people? How you doing? It's been a little over a year now since news first broke that the Bleach anime would be making a comeback with the adaptation of the highly anticipated Thousand-Year Blood Walk. Now, the anime was originally planned to be released sometime this year, but with 2020 being what it was, it's safe to say that things didn't really go according to plan. As of spring of this year, there hasn't been a release date or a trailer, and for things like the studio in charge of the time slot, all we have to go on is speculation. Well, grounded speculation, but speculation nonetheless. I don't intend to speak for anyone, but as a fan base, we are a pretty patient bunch. And if production takes a year longer, I'd rather have that than have them potentially drop the ball on one of the most iconic manga of all time. The train isn't stopping, it's just taking a longer route. So in line with that, I thought it would be a great idea to resume the character analysis. Today's breakdown is going to include events from the Thousand-Year Blood Walk, so it's a bit different from my previous ones in that regard. And to start us off will be one of the most popular captains, Hitsugaya Toshiro. As usual, if you're watching, leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel for some more anime and manga content. Hitsugaya Toshiro is a captain of the 10th Division in the Gotei 13 of Soul Society. He stands at 4'4" and has spiky white hair, each of these features earning him ridicule and alienation at different points in his life. As far as his skill as a Shinigami is concerned, he's demonstrated on numerous occasions that he's a bona fide child prodigy. And it's not just the fact that he graduated from the Shinigami Academy in a single year, a feat that would usually take much longer, or that he became the youngest captain in the history of Soul Society, either of which by themselves would be case in point. But it's also through the admissions of some very powerful figures. Gin, who was considered to be the prodigy before him, praised his power as a blessing bestowed once every few centuries, and Kyoraku, who would later go on to be the captain commander, stated that Toshiro would surpass him in roughly 100 years, which as we know in the context of Shinigami isn't unrealistically long. From the moment of his introduction, Toshiro exudes this cold and serious demeanor, and you can tell that he's overly concerned with formalities, especially with regards to rank and how his peers and subordinates address him. Because of how he looks and how others perceive him, he's developed a tendency to steer clear of things he considers to be petty and childish. He tries to be as professional and mature as possible, almost as if to not necessarily stamp his authority, but more to elicit the respect and acknowledgement that he deserves. And I get that, genius or not, he has worked pretty damn hard to become a captain, and his appearance and age should never be used to diminish that achievement. I do find it hilarious though that someone with such a serious personality would get stuck with the laziest and most laid-back vice captain under his command. And a lot of times their interactions are played for gags because despite the glaringly evident differences in work ethic, Rangiku and Toshiro get along pretty well. It's amazing how well they understand each other's quirks, with Rangiku often trying to skip out on paperwork knowing that Toshiro would absolutely hound her for it, but still end up taking care of it. Or the scene where Rangiku, knowing how socially awkward Toshiro can be, invites him to stay at Orihime's house and he initially brushes it aside. But then a couple of panels later we see him on the roof of the house, showing he chooses to stay close to his vice captain rather than follow Renji or Ikaku's group. Or even after Aizen's defeat, when Rangiku appears outside the cave Toshiro is training in, and you kinda get this shared sense of renewed resolve because only they can understand each other's loss. For Toshiro, a failure to protect someone he deeply cares for in Momo, and for Rangiku, the death of Gin, her longest and most prominent emotional connection. There's a level of trust and respect that even on the battlefield is not limited to their professional relationship, and in some ways most of their banter is mirrored in their first meeting and the fact that Rangiku basically scouted Toshiro for the Gotei 13, which brings me to his early life. Before joining the Gotei 13, Toshiro lived with his grandmother and Momo in West Rukongai. Bar the two, everyone else kept him at arm's length due to the color of his hair, and perhaps as a result of this discrimination he grew cold and stoic, traits that he carried on well into the future. Even Momo's friends avoided him, and after she left home to join the Shinigami Academy, the only person he could really talk to was his grandmother. Momo would occasionally drop by to chat, and it certainly did lessen the stigma of isolation, but things went on like this for years, and during this time he noticed that Momo had grown taller, his grandmother had grown thinner, but he alone had remained the same, almost as if to symbolize the stagnation in his life. And it was none other than Rangiku who broke the mold, setting him on a path to become a Shinigami. She sees a shopkeeper treating him like a virus and immediately stands up for him, sort of like a big sister figure. Later on he wakes up to find her looking over her, and she tells him to train his spiritual pressure by joining the Shinigami Academy. By this point Toshiro has had the same recurring dream of an icy dragon, which as we know is the physical form of his Zanpakuto. But on this particular night, he notices that the room temperature is exceedingly low and his grandmother seems to be shivering in her sleep. Rangiku explains to him that he's leaking out spiritual pressure, which is essentially freezing his surroundings, and if he doesn't get it under control, he may inadvertently end up killing his grandmother. And so this changes his mindset. From his perspective, he never wanted to abandon the only person who stuck by him all his life, a time when everyone else had shunned him. But with the emergence of his spiritual pressure, he now had to leave to keep her from harm, both physically and emotionally. And he takes this chance with his grandmother's blessing to join the Shinigami Academy, where he graduates and joins the Gotei 13 in record time. He quickly rises up the ranks to become the third seat of the 10th Division at a time when Ishin is the captain, with Rangiku as his lieutenant. And even then, he shows an incredible amount of level-headedness that more than surpasses his age. When Rangiku offers to go to Naruki Shigaraki City with Isshin, he calmly assesses the situation and says that they would only be a burden to their captain on a mission where so many Shinigami had lost their lives. Obviously, after the events of Everything But the Rain and Isshin's decision to stay in the real world, the position of captain falls to Toshiro, so by this point he's already obtained his Bankai, which is a really big deal. Toshiro is one of the few captains whose progress is explored throughout the publication of Bleach. Byakuya and Kenpachi are some other names that come to mind when you think of captains with the most screen time, which is why the three of them seem to feature in a number of the popularity polls. From the start, he's displayed a keen sense of observation and wit. He's the first person, at least from the reader's perspective, to suspect foul play in the circumstances surrounding Rukia's execution. And it's mostly through his eyes that we follow the mysterious events leading to Aizen's supposed death. And throughout this period, his sharp intuition leads him to believe that Gin has something to do with the ensuing chaos, which is why he's the first person to discover Aizen's treachery. His intelligence has also seen him being put in charge of the team that traveled to Karakura town to defend against the Arrancar. Similarly, in battle, he's been able to discern his opponent's techniques and use them to maneuver his way to victory. A good example is his fight against Haribel when he manipulates an ice clone of himself to get her to release the true power of her resurrection. Against Lupi, he's also able to manipulate his surroundings to freeze the Arrancar before he ultimately escapes. I think it's safe to say that Toshiro's Zanpakuto exhibits a lot of versatility, which probably gives him an upper hand in fights. Hyorin Maru is a resourceful Zanpakuto, but credit to him for being able to use it in all kinds of different tactics. Up until the 1000-year Blood War arc, it was always referenced that he hadn't really trained his Bankai into a true Bankai. In a lot of battles, it was inferred that his Bankai form had a time limit, and once the last ice petal broke, his Bankai would similarly follow suit and disappear. And I'm gonna be honest, a long period of screen time defined by this weakness made him far less endearing as a character. I know considering his performance in the popularity polls, my views may be going against the grain, but his battles were always underwhelming for me. He gets one-shot by Aizen in his Bankai form. Sure, Aizen is a beast, but still. He gets wrecked by Xiaolong. I know he defeats him in a single move after the seal on his power is removed, but the image of him getting tossed around definitely leaves an impression. Against Yami and Lupi, his attacks are barely enough to incapacitate one of them, even after having ample time to prepare his move. And then, after a hard-fought battle with Haribel, he releases a new ultimate move which he claims to be fatal, only for her to break out of it seemingly unharmed. Fair play, he defeats Yukio with ease, but again, that was expected. The Fullbringers were the weakest antagonists Bleach has ever had, and I think a lot of this was Kubo trying to imply that he is still young and raw and an amateur at using his own powers, a theme that was also punctuated by his mental disposition, because as much as he was known as a cool and rational character, he was also prone to a lot of emotional outbursts, and more often than not, his sudden wild streak could lead to defeat in battle, especially when it had anything to do with Momo or Aizen. And it's in the final arc that we see a semblance of growth in him. He's apparently trained his Bankai into a true Bankai, and you kinda get the impression that he's learned from his experience and is more mature. He humbles himself and seeks training with the lower level Shinigami when his Bankai is stolen, showing a level of experience gained through multiple ordeals. By the way, you could say that the underwhelming essence of his battles still persists, particularly in the way his true Bankai, the one he worked the entire series to obtain, gets stolen by Kangdu the minute he releases it. But in his defense, Kubo does this a lot in the final arc. Zaraki finally using his Bankai but his body falling apart from the physical strain, Ichigo releasing the ultimate Bankai after combining Shinigami, Quincy and Hollow powers, and Yuha breaking his sword before he even had a chance to use it. So I will cut Toshiro some slack in that regard. Toshiro is involved in a mess of events following the loss of his Bankai. He fights Buzz B, then he fights Kangdu, a battle in which he regains his Bankai. Collapsing from injuries and exhaustion, he's found by Giselle and is turned into a zombie. Under Giselle's command, he fights Mayuri and is put out of commission for a short period of time as he recovers from the dezombifying process. Looking back as I was reading it, I remember getting frustrated because we were so close to seeing the culmination of his Bankai training, and at every turn it was getting derailed by trivial fights. But Toshiro does manage to make a comeback, and it's in his final battle of the series against Gerard that we get to see the long-awaited Bankai reveal. Gerard is practically immortal, so as an opponent he serves more as an outlet to display the power of Toshiro's Bankai. And in this battle, we find out that instead of the wilting of his ice petals acting as a timer to end his Bankai, they are more of an impetus to unleash its true power. When the final ice petal breaks, his Bankai reaches full maturity, and Toshiro himself transforms into an adult, elevating all the abilities we'd seen him display up to that point. In his adult form, he manages to flash freeze the giant figure of Gerard in an instant, and fair enough, he was never gonna win against the Quincy, he could barely match him with help from Byakuya and Kenpachi. But I think what Kubo was trying to convey by pitting him against an immortal was how deadly his Bankai attacks had become. Eventually, after a battle of attrition, Gerard is killed by Aoshwalen, and that's the last we see of Toshiro's Bankai. By the end of the series, it's fair to say that his character has evolved in leaps and bounds. From his days of living alone with his grandmother, where he'd basically resigned himself to the prejudice he suffered on a daily basis, to excelling to the position of captain with very little of the emotional maturity required to do so, and now he was at a point where the rough edges and naivety had been shaved down, and he was essentially coming out of his shell after all the experience he'd gained from his numerous battles. He'd now gone from being a squad captain in name alone to a true leader of the Gotei 13, and that for me is what made him such a compelling character. What do you guys think about Toshiro? Do you think he deserved to be the most popular character? And what do you make of his Bankai? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay safe. Peace.